Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahawashi, Bahasham, Barakaha Gwadash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahawashi. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well. In peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 20. Therefore, hear the counsel of Yahweh that he hath taken against Edom, the biblical Edomites being known today as these so-called white people, these so-called Caucasians, the Americans, Europeans, British, Russians, etc., etc., and his purposes that he hath purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. And that least of the flock is also talking about Edomites of the tribe of Amalek, who are the 1948ers over in the Holy Land right now, calling themselves the children of the Most High. But as it says, surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate with them. The 1948ers are going to do something that's going to provoke these different nations out here to be gathered down into that Middle Eastern region for war. Ultimately, the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon, in Joel chapter 3. And that's what I'm going to be going into in this video with an article from English.alarabia.net titled, Israel ready to attack Iran, can do so without U.S. help. IDF chief says, again, surely the least of the flock shall draw them out, because when the 1948ers do something to provoke a war against Iran, that's dragging everybody in. The U.S. and these NATO nations in on the side of the 1948ers and on the side of Iran, nations like Russia, which is a part of biblical prophecy, China, and her other allies. Like I said, it's going to ultimately play into the bigger battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon. And when we see articles like this come out, and the fact that they're talking about the charagma, the Markoftbeast in Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18, which is the C-hip implant. Hey, we know that these prophecies are close to coming to their fulfillment, and our salvation is nearer than when we believed. So like we always tell you sincere Akim and Akwat out there, now more than ever, you should have all 10 toes down in this truth, doing whatever you can to stay in the good graces of your power, Yahweh Bahasham Yahawashi, so you can hope to be of that elect number and be saved from these coming calamities. Jacob's trouble, World War III, nuclear destruction, which is quickly coming upon us. But let's get into this article. The 1948ers are ready to attack Iran and can do so even without support from the United States, which, the United States is going to get dragged into it ultimately. The least of the flock shall draw them out. And over the last summer, the 1948ers and the U.S. did joint military drills simulating long-range attacks against Iran's nuclear facilities. 1948er media quoted IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi as saying on Wednesday, "We are ready to act against Iran. The 1948er army has the ability to strike both in distant countries and near home." I-24 News quoted Halevi as telling the IDF's Army radio. He said that the IDF will enhance its capabilities for a preemptive strike on Iran in the next few years. Hey, but with the way things are looking, it may not be in the next few years, maybe very sooner than we think. And that such a strike would be overwhelming despite the geographical distance. We know how to act alone. We are a sovereign nation that reserves the right to make its own decisions. It would be good to have the United States on our side, but it is not an obligation. He added, surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Hey, these 1948ers acting reckless and kicking that hornet's nest and driving all these different nations down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the Middle Eastern region. These comments come amid growing tensions between Iran and the 1948ers, with Iran accusing the 1948ers of killing two of its military personnel in Syria last week and vowing to retaliate. The 1948ers accused Iran of pursuing nuclear weapons, a claim that Iran denies. The 1948ers have previously warned that if diplomatic efforts failed to curb Iran's nuclear program, it would resort to military action, which is their ultimate goal. If they were really concerned about diplomatic efforts, Benjamin Netanyahu, back during Donald Trump's presidency, wouldn't have gotten Trump to pull out the JCPOA, or the Iranian nuclear deal, and just look up something called the Oded-Yinon Plan, which deals with the greater 1948er project, taking down these different Middle Eastern nations around the 1948ers and expanding their territory and balkanizing the Middle East so no other nation will be strong enough to stand against the 1948ers. And lest we forget what General Wesley Clark said back in the early 2000s, that the U.S. government, the military, has a plan, or had a plan, to knock down 7 Middle Eastern countries in 5 years, and the crown jewel of that goal of countries to knock down was Iran. Hey, so all the cards are being put into place to fulfill biblical prophecy, and it's quickly coming to pass. Apostle Tahar has deemed 2023 to be the hopeful year that all prophecies are fulfilled. And Abaratazah, this is the year. But if it's not, hey, we know that our salvation is nearer than when we believed. But now let's get into these prophecies. This is Revelation chapter 9, verse 12. One woe or destruction is past, referring to World War I. And behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. World War II, which is past, and World War III, which is quickly coming. And we're already in the beginning stages of World War III with what? That war going on over in Ukraine. And you just had Finland authorized to join NATO, which expands NATO's territory that much closer to Russia's borders. But the main part of World War III is going to take place in that Middle Eastern region, the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon. And even though the 1948ers said they can go it alone without the U.S.'s help, hey, once things get kicked off and the least of the flock draws them out, the U.S. is going to come to the aid of the 1948ers, just as Russia is going to come to the aid of Iran. This is Joel chapter 2, verse 20. But I will remove far off from you the Northern Army, the North American Army, the United States military, all branches, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, and will drive him into a land barren and desolate, that Middle Eastern region, specifically Saudi Arabia, which is going to be the main staging ground for the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And the U.S. has a military presence in Saudi Arabia, as well as a military presence in Iraq and in Syria. And with this whole situation going on with the BRICS nations in Saudi Arabia getting closer and closer to nations like China and Russia, best believe that the U.S. is going to do whatever they can to hold on to that strategic advantage in that Middle Eastern region in regards to Saudi Arabia, with his face toward the East Sea. And when we go to a map of the Middle East, we've got Saudi Arabia right here. And to the east, what do you have? The Persian Gulf. And above the Persian Gulf, Iran, the main target of the U.S. in the 1948ers in that Middle Eastern region. And to the northeast, you've got Iraq with the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Like I just said, the U.S. has a military presence in Iraq. as well as in Syria. Of course, you've got the Holy Land right now with those squatters living in there. And his hinder part, or behind him toward the utmost sea, the Red Sea. And his stink shall come up, and his ill savor shall come up, because he had done great things. Hey, for the U.S. military personnel, that Northern Army, as well as these other heathen nations as militaries that are gathered down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat for the War of Armageddon, hey, that's going to be your final resting place. There's going to be a great slaughter in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Many dead bodies for these birds and other scavengers to feed off of. And like I've been saying throughout the video, not just is that least of the flock going to draw in the United States in on their side, but on the side of Iran, it's going to draw in Russia. This is Ezekiel chapter 38. I'm going to start at verse 1. And the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, which is the biblical name for Russia, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws. And that's the Most High putting that old confrontational Soviet Union spirit back on these Russian Edomites, which we can clearly see with their military operation in Ukraine and just Russia talking big shit towards the West, chiefly the U.S., saying that, hey, you keep getting involved in our affairs, hey, we've got these nuclear weapons to deal with you. And then Russia's also working to undermine the U.S. dollar, Western financial system, and they're building up their political and military alliances with these different nations across the planet. With China, they've got military personnel in Syria because they helped Bashar al-Assad win the Syrian civil war against the U.S. and the 1948ers as proxy forces like ISIS. They're building up a presence politically and militarily in these different African nations, recently with Mali and Burkina Faso. And they're building up their military presence, nuclear capable, in that Arctic Ocean region. And I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, their military hardware, the S-300, S-400, fighter jets, hypersonic missiles, tanks, artillery pieces, helicopters, etc., them ultimately being brought forth and gathered down into that Middle Eastern region. Verse 5, Persia, which is the ancient name for Iran, Ethiopia and Libya with them, different African nations, which, like I just said, Russia's been making inroads into Africa, doing political and military deals with these different African nations, which are sick of being under the thumb of Western hegemony. All of them with shield and helmet. Gomer, which is speaking of Turkey, and though Turkey is part of NATO, ultimately they're going to betray NATO in the West and ally themselves with Russia and all his bands. The house of Togarmah of the North Quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company, your allies, such as Persia and Iran, Gomer, Turkey, that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard, a protector, an ally unto them. So again, when the least of the flock shall draw them out, the northern army is going to come in on the side of the 1948ers, the U.S., and in on the side of Iran or Persia, Gog, Russia, and this is ultimately going to play into the bigger battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon. Close it out in Joel chapter 3. I'm going to start at verse 9. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, the heathen Gentiles, prepare war against Iran, World War III, the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the War of Armageddon, nuclear war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. And we can see that these different nations are getting geared up towards war. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen. The 1948ers, the United States, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Syria, these other NATO nations, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahweh, and those mighty ones are the death angels of the Most High, holding back this great destruction, waiting to get the go-ahead to release it, which is mainly going to happen after that charagma, the RFID/NFC C-hip implant in Revelation 13 verses 16 to 18 is mandatorily implemented. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, which in the Hebrew is Yahweh's Shabbat, which means Yahweh's judgment. For there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. And when you go into the first couple of verses of this chapter, you'll see ultimately why the Most High is gathering these heathen nations down into the valley of Jehoshaphat to judge them for afflicting the apple of his eye, the true children of Israel, who are known as the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today. And at the top of that list, as pursuant to Psalms chapter 83, of the heathens that confederated themselves against the nation of Israel to cut them off, were the biblical Edomites, and Amalek, the 1948ers, are also mentioned. And hey, those Amalekites owned those slave ships that brought the southern kingdom from the west coast of Africa to the Americas and a lot of the northern kingdom to other parts of the planet in the transatlantic slave trade. For there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. And again, when we see articles like this come out, we know that the day of Yahweh is very near in the valley of decision. So that's it with this video. With this video, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong. We're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the biblical Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharallah, and until next time, Shalom.